Welcome to the Tory Burch Foundation Business Webinar Program presented by Bank of America. Today's session is Scaling for Retail, and we are going to learn about what to look for in manufacturing partners, the kinds of manufacturers available, how to decide if retail is right for your business right now, and if you've had success at selling something handmade, made to order, or you're ready for manufacturing, you're in the right place today. I'm Molly Heffernan, Vice President of Marketing for the Tory Burch Foundation, and I am beyond thrilled to be here with Jessica Jaffe, who is a strategic business leader, expert in product commercialization, supply chain optimization, category management. I mean, to say that we are in good hands today is an absolute understatement. Jessica is also a startup advisor who brings knowledge from her leadership roles at HelloFresh, Roland Foods, Safeway, and more. I mean, Jessica, it is just a privilege to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to share a little bit of the trials and tribulations that I've experienced during my time bringing lots of products to market with this community.
Amazing. Well, after Jessica's presentation today, we are going to have plenty of time for Q&A. So make sure that you use the chat for all the fun, all the connection with the community here. Use the Q&A box to ask your questions, and we are going to do our best to get to as many as we can. Take notes, but also today's session will be recorded. So check your inboxes for a replay link. That way there you can double click on the things that you learned today. So with that, Jessica, I'm going to turn it over to you because you're the expert today.
Great. Thanks so much. So hi, everybody. I'm going to share my slides here. Just give me one moment. Okay, there we are. Can everybody see that?
Can you just toggle to there we go. It looks great.
Okay. Great. Awesome. So thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Jessica Jaffe, and I'm here to talk about finding the best manufacturer for your business. Just a little bit about me. I've been in the CPG and product world for almost 20 years now. Have brought hundreds of products to the marketplace. As mentioned, did that at Target, at Safeway, HelloFresh, as well as Roland Foods, which is a global importer. So I have experience in both domestic as well as international sourcing and product development. And I'm super excited to share this presentation today because I wish I had had this when I was first starting out. It's a bit of a framework and a roadmap to help you sort of think through where you are in your business, where you are today and where you want to take your business, and what are some of the key considerations that you need to keep in mind as you build out your supply chain. Each of you are in a different spot in a different industry. So I've tried to generalize this as much as I can. I'm definitely going to be coming a little bit more from that CPG perspective, but there are a lot of key learnings that we can share across industries. So let's get started. So what are we going to cover today? So we're going to review the different types of manufacturing. Again, high level, 3 different buckets that we're going to look at. We are going to spend a lot of time thinking through defining needs and sort of your production requirements. And I really see that as the foundation for the entire supply chain. So we're going to want to spend a lot of time digging into the key questions and considerations there. Moving on to finding the right manufacturer. So what are some tips and tricks there? Once you've found that manufacturer, how to vet and interview them, what are those key questions to ask and those things to get answered, and then securing the right manufacturer and transitioning smoothly. So let's get started. So we're going to talk about the types of manufacturers first. So the different types of manufacturers that we're talking about today are, the first one is a full service contract manufacturer. So what does that mean? So that means they're a turnkey solution. You are going to place a purchase order with them. They are going to formulate your product, and you are going to receive a finished good. They take care of everything from the packaging to the ingredient sourcing, clearly manufacturing the product, securing the labels for you, everything. So it's really that turnkey solution. Secondarily, we're talking about custom formulation and specialized manufacturers, and that's probably for some of the more of those smaller brands out there who have a very unique and proprietary formula. Whether that's on the food side, that could be on cosmetics and beauty, but really you have sort of those specialized ingredients, you need specialized packaging that requires, a special line, or there's certain certifications that you need that are, unique to what you're bringing to market. And then the last one is toll processing or co-packing. And that's for folks out there who need a piece of that manufacturing process to be taken care of. So basically you are potentially still making, the entire recipe or something in a test kitchen that you're working with, or you're working with a small lab and you have sort of that bulk ingredient that you then need to get into retail ready packaging. And so, working with a toll processor or a co-packer is going to allow you to get that to be retail ready. Now, depending where you are in your journey, whether you're working alone or you're working with, a small team or a large team, it's really going to depend on, where you want to go with this. Cost consideration is also a big key thing here. So you're going to want to think about, cash flow as well. So thinking about the pros and cons. So with a full service contract manufacturer, it's really looking for brands out there who don't necessarily have kind of like the time and energy to source all of those separate raw materials themselves. If you have that limited infrastructure, you're going to want that turnkey solution. On the con side of that, you have less control over ingredient sourcing, less control over customization, and it could be, more costly if you are, not being able to control those things. For custom formulation and specialized manufacturers, it's really for those brands out there who have that very unique customer proposition. You're bringing to market something that hasn't been done before, maybe, or something with a very specialized ingredient. And that way you have really full control over the formulation process, again, as well as that packaging side of things. And you're also going to probably have an opportunity to produce in much smaller batches and do some test market launches and those sorts of things. On the con side, it can be more expensive, again, because you're probably going to be running limited runs and sort of all the retooling and those types of costs associated with it. And it could require more time for testing and approvals, and it's likely going to be more expensive. With toll processing, it's really useful if you're sort of not ready yet for that kind of like full turnkey solution. You still want to have control over that bulk processing that you're going to be doing. And so, that's where you're going to want to really turn to, a co-packer. But it does require a ton of management from the brand, right? So you're going to be sourcing all of your raw materials, you're going to be managing your production, you're going to be managing the supply chain of getting that bulk material to the co-packer, and then back through your supply chain. So just some sort of key things to think through as you decide what type of manufacturing makes the most sense for you. Next, we're going to go to defining our needs and requirements. And again, like I said, this is really the foundation. This is where you're going to want to spend a lot of time digging deep and understanding, what kind of supply chain you want to build, what kind of supply chain you want to build, again, for today, and what sort of supply chain you want to build for the future. And so, when I think about defining what the requirements, what it's really going to help you do is sort of minimize surprises. It's going to help you have stronger negotiation power because you understand all the sort of different impacts of the supply chain and how that impacts your profitability. And it's really just going to give you then the opportunity to control your costs more effectively, because with all that knowledge, you'll be able to minimize your costs. So let's get started. When I think about different considerations when selecting a manufacturer, I broke it up into two different sections. There's the cost considerations, which is always top of mind. And then there's going to be the operational considerations as well. When we think about cost, I really want folks to sort of have this mindset around total cost of ownership. I think we are, can sometimes get into a situation where we've, figured out what our cost of goods is, or, what are those direct costs? And then we build out our SRP and or retail price. And then we don't take into consideration all of those other touch points along that supply chain, which erode your margin. So you're going to want to think about total cost of ownership, which is basically including all of the costs associated with sort of bringing in the ingredients, packaging and producing the product, getting it into your warehouse and fulfillment, all of your sort of distribution and freight costs. And then any other considerations around tariffs and fees, which we know is a super hot topic right now, considering what's going on in the world. So again, with that mindset of that total cost of ownership model, the first thing that we're going to talk about is cost of goods. So cost of goods is your total direct cost of producing your product. It's materials, it's labor, and it's production overhead. Super important because it directly impacts your profit margin. So that's going to be your baseline, and that's going to be the bulk of your cost. Or hopefully it's the bulk of your cost because you figured out some of the other supply chain things. But it's going to be the bulk of your cost. And really the things that you want to sort of consider at this early stage is understanding MOQs, so minimum order quantities, and how those impact pricing. What's really interesting about working with contract manufacturers and co-packers is that they find efficiencies of scale at different sort of production rates. And so you're going to get a cost at that MOQ, and it's going to be basically the minimum size of an order that they can produce so that they're still efficient and profitable. They have opportunities to drive additional efficiencies with higher production rates. So you're going to want to get that MOQ, but you're also going to ask for tiered pricing. You're going to say, okay, well, if your MOQ is 1,000 units, if I get it to 1,500 units or 2,000 units, can I see a reduction in my cost of goods? And so you're going to likely get a better cost. But what you're going to want to consider there as we go through sort of the rest of this conversation is sort of the implications on the rest of your supply chain. Again, if you take on a larger order today, you're going to have to warehouse it, you're going to have to move it, you're going to have to sort of manage through that as well. With the cost of goods, there's also charges for customization, sort of setup and tooling. Every time they touch their production line in any way, there are going to be fees associated with that. So again, you need to consider that. And then materials fluctuations. Again, we're seeing a lot of volatility with tariffs and fees. We saw a lot of volatility in raw materials with some other different global geopolitical things going on in the world. So you're going to want to understand, where those commodity ingredients are being sourced and whether or not your manufacturing partner has contracts for those ingredients. The next thing we're going to be talking about is we think about that value chain, right? So you have your finished good from your manufacturer. It has to go somewhere. So warehousing and fulfillment. So what is warehousing and fulfillment? It's the fees associated with storing finished goods before they are sold or shipped. And costs can add up over time. So I think warehousing is sort of one of those kind of can be a little bit of a black hole and sort of, teasing out all of the different fees that you're going to be charged. So what are the things to consider when you're identifying a warehousing and fulfillment partner? You are going to want to think about location, right? So are you going to pick a warehouse that is close to your manufacturer? Or are you going to pick a warehouse that's close to, your offices if you want to have sort of, more contact with the product? Or are you going to pick a warehouse that's closer to your largest retail partner, whoever that might be? So definitely something to think about. I will say, ask your manufacturing partner if they do warehousing as well, because that is the most cost efficient way. A lot of folks aren't doing that today because they're storing a lot more raw materials and really following a just-in-time model with production, but always worth asking. You're going to want to understand, again, their fee structure. Is it per pallet per month? Is it per cubic foot per month? Every time they touch your product or a pallet, they are going to charge you. So make sure that you really understand what those charges are and how you're building your supply chain to sort of minimize all of those touch points. You're going to want to think about what type of warehouse you need. So if you have perishable items or items that require sort of certain temperature or humidity controls, you're going to want to make sure that you are working with a partner that can manage that and they have sort of FIFO just to manage waste and all that sort of stuff. You're going to want to think about fulfillment capabilities. So it depends on what type of business you have. So if you are, sort of a D2C brand, you're going to want to work with a fulfillment center that can handle, sort of single units, not just pallets or cases. And you're also going to want to make sure that there's appropriate sort of software integration on the back end so that you can offer really great customer experience for your customers. Next, a little bit about distribution and freight. And so that's, the truck, or I guess truck or boat or plane, that's going to get your product from your manufacturer to your warehouse, and from your warehouse to your customer. So a couple different things to consider if you are working with an international manufacturer. So you're going to think about freight on board, so FOB, so who is paying for those charges? You might be getting a landed cost of your product from the manufacturer site, and you're responsible for getting it over here to the US. So you're going to want to understand sort of all of the related things having to do with importing, picking the mode of shipping that you want, which is going to impact timing and cost. And then if you're sort of on a domestic side of things, you're going to be looking at fuel surcharges, special handling, and you're also going to want to talk to your warehouse and fulfillment partner and see if they have a relationship, and they likely do have a relationship with a carrier that you can piggyback onto, and sort of take advantage of the rates that they've negotiated. Not going to get into distribution and sort of distributor relationships today. That's like a whole other very detailed topic. But if you are sort of considering that just at a super high level, really looking into sort of all of the complicated fees that are associated with being with a traditional distributor, and then sort of what services they're going to provide to you. And then lastly, with cost considerations, we're looking at tariffs and fees. So added this in here, probably not something that I would traditionally talk about on this topic, but given everything that's happening in the world today, tariffs are government imposed fees on goods crossing borders. We're hearing a lot about it. And I guess it's just something that as you're thinking about your supply chain, if you have identified an international partner as the partner that you want to go with from a manufacturing standpoint, really understanding the associated tariffs, where they are today, what are those harmonization codes that are going to apply to your goods. And I highly recommend working with a customs broker, or a lawyer who's familiar with working on imports. Tariffs can really sort of impact you. I work for a global importer, and we imported, I don't know, I think it was like 4,000 containers or something like that a year. And there was one product that we were importing. We'd been importing it for years under the wrong harmonization code. And ultimately, it was discovered that we were doing that. And so we had to pay, back taxes or back tariffs, tens of thousands of dollars. So it's definitely something that can add up if you get it wrong. So I highly recommend working with somebody if it's something that, is part of your supply chain. Next, we'll move on to some operational considerations. So here we're going to talk about geographical preference, where do you want your manufacturing partner to be? What makes the most sense, again, for your supply chain? A little bit about volume requirements and MOQs, scalability, certifications and traceability, material sourcing and packaging needs. Again, these may or may not all apply to each of your sort of business needs. But it's important to just answer the questions and make sure that you understand what role that they potentially play. So first, we'll talk about geographical preference. So why it's important, logistics, tariffs, working hours, all of these things go into having a successful relationship with your manufacturing partner. And so I focus this primarily on domestic versus international. There's always going to be that consideration, again, for your manufacturing partner and geographically, where it might make sense, even within the US, to sort of base your manufacturing. So for domestic, a lot of the pros here are, communication. You're going to be dealing with potentially some time zones, but not, major time zones, sort of, 12, 13 hours away. Faster lead times, lower shipping costs because you're shipping domestically. You yourself can be closer, to the manufacturer. And then you're closer to your distribution partners, you're closer to your warehouse, and you're closer to your customers. Again, all of these things will save you money as you think about that value chain and your overall profitability. But sometimes international makes sense for your business, depending on what category you're in. And what product you're bringing to market. So lower production costs are definitely something that you can see sort of from international suppliers. or manufacturers, and also more capabilities at scale. And so what that means is there are certain capabilities or ingredients that just make a lot more sense to get internationally. And so that's just a consideration that you should have as you think through your geographical preference. Next up are volume requirements. And we talked a little bit about it, earlier on here. But not all manufacturers can accommodate sort of, the small volume that startups have, that many of you are in. And then you're going to want to think about where your business is today. Again, what that initial order is going to be, what your sort of future orders are going to look like. And then as you scale and as you continue to grow as a business, will that manufacturer be able to scale with you? You're going to do a lot of work with that manufacturer on development, packaging. You're going to make sure that the labels are correct. You're going to want everything to be, perfect. And if that manufacturer can scale with you, you're going to have to start again with a different manufacturer. So again, you're defining those MOQs. You're aligning on that launch and growth plan. You're understanding tiered pricing. Again, can't stress that enough, thinking about that tiered pricing. And then you're just understanding your lead times. And you're understanding how quickly, if you are a smaller brand, getting those manufacturers to slot you in. You're going to be able to sort of your first production run, you're going to be able to understand when that is. But if you get a spike in demand, is that manufacturer going to be able to get you some more line time quickly? Do they have the ingredients that are part of your formula or materials, readily available? So you just want to think through those things, ask those questions of that partner, and it speaks a little bit to here to scalability. So again, you don't want to outgrow a manufacturer, and you want to understand their capacity, their long-term flexibility, and then are they investing in new equipment? Are they investing in new technology? Where they are today is one thing, but sort of, how are they investing in their business as well? And is that a partner that, will continue to invest in you as well? With that being said, can they support innovation? How quickly can they support innovation? If you want to bring in a new flavor or a new pack size or something like that, how quickly could they get that into their production run? And then I would ask, do they service other brands that are at your scale today? So I think that's a really important question to ask, because you want to make sure that, they understand where you are. And you want to make sure that they are also supporting other brands at that stage, so they know how to work with companies of your size. Next, we think about certifications and traceability. And certifications and traceability are important for both you as a brand, as well as for the retailers that you work with. So from a brand perspective, you've defined your brand, your brand, your brand's positioning, what sort of makes your brand unique in the marketplace. And that might mean that you have sort of certain certifications or certain requirements for the brand. That could be, organic USDA, it could be kosher, it could be sort of like Leaping Bunny, it could be any sort of different type of thing. So you're going to want to make sure that you're asking the manufacturer for the certifications as well as any audit histories, just to make sure that it is, up to standards. And the retail partners are likely going to ask for those things as well. So when they set you up as a brand, they're going to want to understand sort of your manufacturing practices to make sure that the product is safe, either for consumption or for use. The next thing here is the next two things are on material sourcing and packaging sourcing. And so this is going to be a little bit dependent on the manufacturer that you pick. So if you're going with a turnkey solution, some of these questions you're going to want to ask, but they're not necessarily going to be your responsibility. These are more for if you are sourcing any of your ingredients or your materials or your packaging yourself. And so you're going to want to ask from a material sourcing standpoint, if you are going with that turnkey solution, do you have a contracted relationship with your sources of supply, so that they don't see volatility in their supply chain that they then could pass on as an increased cost to you? There would be nothing worse than sort of setting up your entire, go-to-market strategy around sort of your retail pricing after you've kind of built that fully loaded cost. And then you know sort of what the market can sustain for an SRP, and then all of the sudden that cost of goods is completely eroded, or is the margin is completely eroded because your cost of goods has exploded. You're going to want to understand if they're, if they're sourcing sustainably and ethically, if that's sort of, important to you as your brand. And then are they open to working with custom formulations? So some manufacturers will not let ingredients that they don't procure themselves into their manufacturing facilities. Again, important to ask if you are requiring a customized formula, customized ingredient, flavor, whatever that might be. You're going to want to ask that question and understand if you can bring those ingredients in. And then lastly, our on packaging needs, again, is your manufacturing partner going to provide the packaging? Do you need to source the packaging and get it into their facility? Again, or is it that turnkey solution? In many cases, from a label standpoint, they may or may not print the labels for you. They might have those partnerships with printers or not. But you're probably going to want to, own sort of like the look and feel of the packaging, the tags, all of that sort of stuff. You're going to want to think about primary packaging and secondary packaging, especially for beauty brands. And then here you're also going to want to be thinking about whether the packaging that you require and the packaging that you want to be out in the marketplace to best represent your brand, whether or not that manufacturer has the ability to put that on their machines as well. So they're going to have different capabilities, and you're really going to want to understand what those are. So that's the foundation. It's a lot of information. And I know that I went through it quickly because we have limited time. We could probably spend hours on each of those. But again, this is sort of the framework. These are the key considerations for you to have as you're thinking about building that supply chain and that value chain. And so once you've defined all of your requirements, the next thing is finding the right partner. And that, traditionally has been a very difficult thing to do, at least in the food space. I've spent hours upon hours in Google searches and those types of things. And those still, are valid and still are things that, we have to kind of go through to find the right partner. But I'm very pleased that there are now a lot more online directories and platforms that are available for sort of small, small brands and small producers to find partners to scale with. Within the food and CPG space, Keychain came online about a year ago. Great source to find a manufacturer or a co-packer that makes the product that you're looking for. There are other sort of international sources as well, global sources, Alibaba, Makers Row for apparel. But I think, trying to find that online directory and platform is key, and is a huge, huge solution that didn't exist even, a couple of years ago. There's going to be the old school ways of finding folks too, trade shows and industry events. So highly recommend, if there's, a trade show happening in your city or one that you can easily get to, that's in your space, get out there and walk the floor, meet people, PLMA, Natural Products Expo, Cosmoprof, like all of these are great sort of opportunities to, see what's out there, see, the competition as well. But also just to meet different manufacturers. You can talk to them and sort of see their capabilities firsthand, touch and feel the products. And then referrals and networking. So I think, this is a great forum and a great resource to connect with folks who are in sort of a similar industry or a similar time in their journey. Talk to other people. It might have been a supplier or manufacturer that didn't work for them or did work for them. They can provide a referral, networking, alumni associations, industry associations, chambers of commerce, those types of things. Just, get out there and have those conversations. So now we've defined our requirements. We have hopefully found a short list of manufacturers that we can talk to. And now it's time to vet them. So what does that look like? So I love a good checklist. And I think it's important to have that checklist and to collect this data in sort of a very, careful, methodical way. So you're going to want to do that initial outreach and screening. So you're going to ask them what their manufacturing capabilities are, what their packaging capabilities are, and then R&D. So we didn't talk too much about R&D, but as you sort of bring a formula or a recipe to one of these manufacturers, they're going to work with their, you're going to work with their R&D team, their technical team to be able to scale, for production. What are their sourcing strategies? Again, like we talked about, are they contracting commodities? Are they not contracting those commodities? How are they sort of hedging for any fluctuations? MOQs, we spent a lot of time on MOQs. The pricing, so understanding, getting their pricing, dropping that into your margin model, and seeing where it lands. Lead times are important. You want to make sure that as you're getting orders that you're going to be able, and diminishing your inventory, that you are going to be able to, reorder and get product in time for whatever, retailer opportunity you have. Do they have startup experience? Again, we talked about that a little bit earlier, but really sort of like, hey, do you work with companies of my size? Do you not? If you don't, why don't you? If you do, can I have a referral? And then you're going to want to ask for production samples. So, it's not going to be your exact product, but sort of a like product. You're going to want to get those samples and evaluate them. You're going to want to see if you can visit the facility. So if it's a domestic manufacturer, hopefully that's something that you can do. And I can't stress this enough. I've had the opportunity to work with dozens and dozens of manufacturers throughout the world. And going to visit their facility is the best way to understand their capabilities, understand their processes, quality control, safety, all those types of things from a food perspective. Are they kind of compliant with all of the HACCP and required documentation, just those overall processes? And you just learn a lot by having the chance to go visit a facility. So I can't honestly stress that enough if that's something that you can do. So you've done the due diligence, sort of that initial outreach and screening. Hopefully you've been able to get over to a facility to see, or a bunch of facilities to see and compare, which is also really important. You're going to be wanting to compare and contrast these different manufacturing partners. So then you have sort of shortlisted your manufacturers, you've gotten all that information, you've built out your total cost of ownership model, and you've decided which manufacturer you want to move forward with. So you're going to want to be thinking about negotiating the terms of your supplier agreement. You're really going to want to nail down that cost structure and any associated fees. You want to make sure that it's very clearly articulated, and there isn't sort of any ambiguity in that. You're going to want to make sure you're documenting the MOQ requirements and any tiered pricing. If they will, and not all will, but if you can get them to commit to the lead time, that would be incredibly beneficial for you as well. Again, to manage your supply chain and to sort of manage fluctuations in demand. You're going to want to identify who owns the design or any IP. So if you brought them your mother's, favorite recipe that you're now going to commercialize, you want to make sure that you own that recipe, and that's not something that they can then go and sell to, a private label brand or a different brand, a competitor, anything like that. So you're going to want to make sure you're protecting that. You're going to want to sign a mutual NDA as well, again, just to sort of protect, the integrity of what they're doing as well as the integrity of what you're doing. And then there's going to be payment terms. So, depending again on where your credit is, in some cases, you're going to have to sort of pay as soon as those products are ready to be shipped. But I would try to negotiate for as long payment terms as you possibly can get. And then the other piece there is on liability and insurance. With this contract, again, I would encourage you to seek counsel, so outside counsel, who can review any sort of contracts that you're going to be signing. It is an expense, but it can be a lot more expensive on the back end if you sort of sign up for something that you didn't necessarily realize you were agreeing to. So definitely have, folks look over, legal team look over the master supplier agreement or the supplier agreement, and they'll be able to help with things around liability and insurance, recalls, those types of things. And then finally, we are getting to sort of like transitioning smoothly. So you've done all this great work. You built this great supply chain. What's next? So schedule a trial run. And then consider being on site for that trial run so that you can sort of do that first run approval, first article inspection, whatever we want to call it. I can't stress how important that is. I've been in situations where I've had a full run of a product, $40,000 worth of a product run, and I've had to reject the entire shipment because it didn't meet the specification. And so that's a hard conversation to have with a manufacturer. I had the heft of Safeway behind me with that one, but it's your brand. And you only get, one shot sort of with the customer, with that retailer. And so you want to make sure that the product that you approved on that front end is the product that's coming out the back end once it's gone through sort of full production. You're going to want to nail down demand and forecasting. Again, demand planning is a whole other topic to consider. But you're really going to want to nail down the demand and the forecasting, and you're going to want to, think about how much inventory you want to hold at any given time. That is cash. That could be spent on marketing or other sort of initiatives. So you're going to want to really get into that. You're creating those open communication channels with domestic manufacturers. Time zones aren't an issue. So you're going to want to make sure that they know you and they see you. And that's also why going and visiting their site or being on site really helps with that connectivity. You're securing your warehouse and fulfillment partners. You're finalizing that distribution plan. And then the last thing is risk management. So your backup plan. Anything could happen in a facility. A water main could break. There could be a fire. There could be anything. So as you're going through this process, make sure that that short list of suppliers that you sort of went through that due diligence with, that you're keeping them, a little bit warm in case of a situation where you need to switch to a different manufacturer. So I know that we're just about at time. I want to open this up for questions. I saw some activity kind of popping up. And I did go through this quickly. I will be sharing this deck with the community. So, there going to be a lot of questions and a lot of things that we can dig into further. Yeah. But, just wanted to say thank you, open it up for questions. I think that's Molly's job. But happy to be a resource to you however I can.
Thank you so much, Jessica. This was a lot of critical information. We are going to get started. There were so many questions that came in, but I want to anchor back to thinking about, cash flow and costs, and just have a quick financial conversation here. What would be your piece of advice for really thinking about how cash flow intersects with the strategy around scaling your production? And if you were to just give everyone that one piece of advice there, what should they be doing when you're trying to reconcile both ends of that?
It's a hard question to answer as sort of like a general thing. But I mean, if you sort of think about like the big buckets of where your cash is going to go, a lot of it's going to be held up in that inventory because you want to make sure that you have product available for those opportunities. And opportunity is going to come and kind of knock on your door, and you can't necessarily wait the 6 weeks, 8 weeks to get into production. So I would say, you're thinking about your demand, and you're thinking about sort of the cash that's in there, stuck in your inventory, how quickly you're going to be able to turn. So we talk about sort of retail turns, how quickly you're going to be able to turn that inventory into the cash and the profitability so that you're getting that back to invest in your business. So again, it's a hard general question to answer. I don't necessarily have a rule of thumb to share on that one.
I guess to follow on that, who is the person that you should be having on speed dial through this process? Like, do you need a trusted accounting person? Like, who are the people that you're like, okay, we're doing this, we're scaling, and I need to be talking to them every day?
Not every day, but you're going to want a legal partner.
Yep.
So I think that's definitely one. You are going to want to have an accountant to understand sort of the finances overall. And then I think you're going to want to have other folks who are like in the trenches as well. Or sort of a trusted advisor who's kind of gone through the process that you can just kind of like pick their brain, ask a quick question. That's what I wish I had sort of had throughout early on in my career. But there's going to be a little bit of trial and error. And I think by building that foundation and answering a lot of these questions early on, you're going to minimize, some of that trial and error.
Amazing. And I guess in speaking about bringing outside people into the fold, you walked us through creating a cost structure. Is this something that you would recommend founders really focus on doing themselves, or is this the moment where you bring in those outside advisors to help you build out some of your cost structuring?
I think it's something that you can do internally.
Hmm.
It's sort of just really like itemizing all of the costs, understanding all of the costs. And then you're going to also understand, what sort of retail price the market that you are in can sustain.
Hmm.
So if you have a conversation with a manufacturer right off the bat and their cost is like at the retail that you were anticipating, that there's not something that you want to talk to. So really, understanding again, like where your SRP is and what your market that you're going to be in, where your competitors are and what they're offering. In certain sort of niche industries where there's a lot more flexibility and you can get better margins, that's not going to be as important, but in sort of a CPG environment, that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And because we started talking about having the right legal people in your corner, et cetera, how do you deal with exclusivity matters when you're working with a manufacturer? How do you start to put some protection around your IP?
Yeah. So two different ways. So one is on that mutual NDA. So you're going to want to get that in place as soon as you start sharing any information about your business.
Okay.
So that's any sort of technical information, any of your sort of brand proposition, just anything related to your, like, what is your equity, and that is your brand, and that is your recipe, your formula, your pricing model too. They're probably going to want to get that in place. They'll want to protect themselves too. But you're going to want to get that mutual NDA in place, and then you're going to want to set up something around IP, which is going to be in that supplier agreement. So there'll be a clause in there around protecting your intellectual property.
Mhm. And are there any pro tips on then managing? Is everything that was in that contract upheld? Or is that a whole
Yeah,
other webinar?
it's a whole other topic. I'm not dealing with that in my other life right now. But yeah, I mean that's just sort of like the risk, unfortunately, that you have to take if you are going to have somebody else sort of touch your product and manufacture it.
Mhm.
But the agreements are there to protect the integrity of your brand, of your IP. And then hopefully you won't have to get sort of more legal involved in that.
Yeah. It's interesting because we were talking about cost, and I see that Jill dropped in the Q&A a question around, how can you consider pricing a product when you are a completely new category player? You don't have others to benchmark to. Um, and so you're kind of going in with a little less information.
So like a category creator.
Hmm.
I think that there's always going to be some simile in the world that you can sort of look to say, okay, well, if this doesn't exist today, what is the alternative? Like, what are people doing in place of this thing that I'm bringing to the market?
Yep.
What sort of their tolerance and elasticity around price in that space? Or you could say, I don't care, it doesn't matter. I'm bringing something so amazing to the market that I'm just going to set the retail, and I'm going to bring so much value behind that product that I feel confident that I can charge sort of the price that I want. So there's kind of like two different paths you can go. But generally speaking, you're going to be able to find some sort of benchmark
Mhm.
within the industry that you're playing in that you can reference.
Right. I'm making a weighted blanket, maybe nobody had before, in the past, but what do people buy blankets for?
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. So my technology might be super innovative. I can get a premium against what a regular weighted blanket or a regular blanket would be.
Mhm.
But it gives, again, it gives you kind of like that baseline to work from.
That's incredibly helpful. Um, so, someone mentioned wanting to manage things in the manufacturing process, like chargebacks, slotting fees, other little known costs that come with then having a major retailer contract. So, how can the growing businesses on today's session manage those factors against wanting what comes with being in those retailers, which is access to new customers?
That is a great question. And that's sort of why I didn't go into the whole distributor side of things. So there's the distributor fees and everything associated with kind of touching your product. And then there's sort of the retailer fees. So getting into retail can be super exciting. When you land that big major retailer, you're incredibly excited, but along with that comes a huge financial investment.
Mhm.
So you're going to be investing in the inventory because you have to, when they send you a PO, you have to be able to service them. You're going to be paying those slotting fees. So again, that's going to be slotting in distribution, and that could also be slotting potentially on their shelves as well. There are going to be those chargebacks for things like damaged goods, expired goods. You're going to be paying for markdowns. So if they want to promote your product, you're going to have to invest in at least sort of at that like CPG and mass grocery kind of channels. You're going to be paying to invest in marketing your products and having those TPCs, so the temporary price cuts. So again, that's like a whole other I think each of those could be their own sessions, to be honest.
Yeah.
Highly complex. But I think just having the awareness that you need to ask those questions and you need to dive deeper into that contract and really understand how each of those costs go into that TCO, right? You want to account for those in your profitability model, is a huge step forward, because lots of people kind of go in blind and then get hit with all these fees, and it erodes their profitability completely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see Jennifer in the chat saying that we need more sessions with you. So loud and clear to hear you. I want to ask, because you shared at the beginning that you wished you had had this framework, you're giving a tremendous amount of advice through this lens. But for anybody who is maybe just getting started or is just getting started wrapping their arms around this aspect of their business, I guess, even in combination with a framework, what are some of the most common pitfalls that you would say, just please, even if you're using the framework, this is where you as a founder need to get out of your own way, the things that are just the mistakes that you too often see come to your door?
I think the biggest one, and that's why I spent a little bit more time on it, is that TCO model. I think people really don't think about all those little fees and those little things that are going to come back and really erode your margins, because you could be super psyched that you negotiated the best cost of goods and you're like, oh, this is great, I'm going to make all this money, my margin, my gross margin is X, not realizing that your operating margin is probably going to like get that down to half of what you thought it was, and now you don't have any money to go out and do marketing and whatever else that is you need to do. So I would just say that TCO model and building it out, very, very detailed around, within whatever spreadsheet or whatever, tool that you're using, is that you're line iteming all of these sort of considerations. There could be a zero next to it, but just make sure that you're thinking through sort of all of those pieces along the whole value chain.
Yeah.
At the manufacturer, at the warehouse and fulfillment, and with sort of any, distribution and freight as well.
Okay. Amazing. And so, this really interesting question came in from Melanie, and I know we're dipping into a lot of different topics here, but I think this is one that anyone in the food space has probably thought about or encountered. So I'll read Melanie's response here. We self-manufacture food products. What happens with our recipes with a co-packer? It's Melanie's understanding that we would love to have the ability to take our formulations away with us if we leave that manufacturer. Is that something that can be negotiated? Like, what should these food products be doing?
Yeah, 100%. So that's sort of like that front end work that you'll want to do around the intellectual property. So if you were bringing them a recipe, it's a family recipe, it's your recipe, that's your IP. You own that. So you're going to want to make sure that that's built into the contract. Again, you're not going to want to share it until you have a mutual NDA in place, because that is kind of like that minimal protection that it gives you. But you can put that into an agreement with a supplier that you own the recipe. They cannot make it for any other CPG or brand or whatnot. And then from there, you have the right to take that recipe to a different manufacturer. Where it gets a little bit tricky for you could be in the ingredients that manufacturer is sourcing. So they might be, sourcing a certain flavor or seasoning or something like that is tied to sort of like the development of that recipe for scale. And if you move it to a new manufacturer, you're going to be starting from scratch. You're going to be going through that whole process again. And there could be an ingredient that your new manufacturer can't source in the exact same way. So just something to think about. Again, it shouldn't deter you from, moving and scaling as needed, but definitely think through it.
Yeah. And that lends itself well to a question that Tamika asked, because she right now is going through the process of one of her manufacturers is closing. She's searching for a new one. So, how realistic is it to expect that you are delivering that same quality product with a new manufacturer from the beginning? And how can you accelerate that process, regardless whether you're food, physical product, beauty, et cetera? Like what can you be doing for that to smooth those transitions?
Sure. So if it's your recipe and you own it originally, then that the specification that is part
Mhm.
of the development process, like you own that as well. So you can share that with a new manufacturing partner. Where it gets a little bit tricky sometimes is in like the exact ratios, or sort of again like some of those kind of like secret,
Mhm.
not secret, but sort of like those proprietary ingredients that they might be procuring. But you're going to be finding a manufacturer who has a really strong technical team, and they are food scientists, and they will be able to match those recipes. I think that there's going to be the difference, though, sort of matching that recipe on the bench, which is sort of like those small scale,
Mhm.
and then making sure that as it goes through full production, that you're still maintaining the same integrity of that product.
Right.
Definitely something to think through.
And I've seen a lot of brands as they've scaled have really direct communications to customers. We made a change and we hear you if something wasn't working, and just being really honest that they're on a journey with you as you grow, I think is something to just consider, or listen to your customer in terms of how you communicate with them. They want to see you win. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And your
Um,
manufacturer wants to see you win too. So if you find the right partner, like they are rooting for you and they want you to be successful, as much as you do.
Yeah. Now, for the folks that are a little bit earlier, someone asked, what is the best way to successfully, take myself from placements in a local city and leverage those for future placements?
Um, Trying to So how to use that experience to
Yeah, I've gotten
gain
my product.
additional placements?
Yeah, I got my product on local shelves, but I'm
Hmm.
use this as the proof point for leveling up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just going to be a lot of grit and hard work, unless you're working with a broker, and then probably at an early stage, I wouldn't recommend necessarily working with a broker. But yeah, I mean, it's great to have sort of that credibility and those proven sales, where you could have sort of additional feedback from consumers, and sort of those social media touch points and that sort of stuff of folks behind your brand is essential. But a lot
And
of it's just going to
can I double click on something you just said? You said you wouldn't work with a broker early on. Can you tell us why?
really expensive.
Okay.
They are representing multiple brands. They're never going to represent your brand the way that you are. And especially as that early stage founder, going in and telling your story, like you are your brand, you're
Mhm.
going to tell it the best. So if
Yeah.
you get that opportunity at a trade show, at a networking event, if you happen to be able to get into a retail door after knocking a lot,
Yeah.
you really are going to want to represent your brand. As you get bigger and you have greater opportunity to expand, potentially something to look into. But that I wouldn't recommend doing that right off the bat.
Amazing. Now, there are so many artisans, like truly the creators of their craft and their product on, how does some of this information apply to a more handmade business?
I think that's going to depend on the category
Mhm.
again. So I think in the food space, you're still able to, if you're working in an industrial kitchen, and you're making that product yourself, working
Mhm.
with a co-packer, because you're still controlling every aspect of the supply chain. Again, that time managing the supply chain is away from sales, or
Yeah.
marketing, but you're going to have to balance these things. But in that sense, it is handmade, it is artisan, and so you're controlling all aspects of that.
Mhm.
Um, Same thing for beauty. You have that same opportunity, and there you can, have some fun with the packaging.
Yeah.
But I can't speak for sort of other industries.
Yeah. Big topic. I did want to, we have a little more time, so I want to ask one more question
Yeah.
here. And it's, now that everyone has a framework, um, and has benefited from your expertise, um, what would you say the most important thing that they should know about working with a retail buyer is? The one thing that they're going to go talk about at dinner.
What is the most important thing?
I'm asking you the
That's a hard.
hard-hitting ones today.
Yeah, you're stumping me here, because I'm like, I think it all is. So I think that just being knowledgeable about the supply chain, about your manufacturer, about the types of requirements that these retailers are going to have.
Yeah.
Again, to me, and like anyone who's ever worked with me knows that I'm all about like scalable, replicable processes. and really building a strong foundation. And in this case, knowledge really is like power.
Yeah.
And so really fully understanding the entire supply chain, the impact with retailers is hugely important. And then again, just representing your brand and embodying your brand.
So incredible advice, and everyone here is in the driver's seat of their own business. So, I mean,
Yes.
just thank you so much, Jessica, for breaking down a really big topic with us today, and one that I think we could keep pulling on threads on for hours more. But I know we're reaching the end of our hour with you today. So thank you so much.